Welcome to the U.S. Post Your Digital News channel. If you are new to our channel, please hit subscribe button and press bell icon to support our efforts. Today, we are discussing the recent update on President Trump vs. the courts. I am sure it will not end well for Mr. President. What you think? Share in comments. Let's start the video. President Trump has wasted no time in his second term in declaring war on the nation's federal judiciary, the country's legal profession, and the rule of law. He has provoked a constitutional crisis with his stunning frontal assault on the third branch of government and the American system of justice. The casualty could well be the constitutional democracy Americans fought for in the Revolutionary War against the British monarchy 250 years ago. Mr. Trump has yearned for this war against the federal judiciary and the rule of law since his first term in office. He promised to exact retribution against America's justice system for what he has long mistakenly believed is the federal government's partisan weaponization against him. It's no secret that he reserved special fury for the justice system because it oversaw his entirely legitimate prosecution for what the government charged were the crimes of attempting to overturn the 2020 presidential election and purloining classified documents from the White House, secreting them at Mar-a-Lago and obstructing the government's efforts to reclaim them. He escaped the prosecutions by winning a second term, stopping them in their tracks. But unless Mr. Trump immediately turns an about-face and beats a fast retreat, not only will he plunge the nation deeper into constitutional crisis, which he appears fully willing to do, he will also find himself increasingly hobbled even before his already vanishing political honeymoon is over. The bill of particulars against Mr. Trump is long and foreboding. For years, Mr. Trump has viciously attacked judges, threatened their safety, and recently he called for the impeachment of a federal judge who has ruled against his administration. He has issued patently unconstitutional orders targeting law firms and lawyers who represent clients he views as enemies. He has vowed to weaponize the Department of Justice against his political opponents. He has blithely ignored judicial orders that he is bound by the Constitution to follow and enforce. There has been much talk in recent weeks of this constitutional crisis, in which the president has defied and stonewalled the federal judiciary as he has sought to consolidate his power. The Republicans who control Congress have already demonstrated their fealty to Mr. Trump. All that is left to check his impulses is the nation's independent judiciary, which Alexander Hamilton deemed essential to our country's constitutional governance. A country without an independent judiciary is not one in which any of us should want to live, except perhaps Mr. Trump while he resides in the White House. Last week, he tossed more matches into the fire he has long been stoking against the rule of law. On Tuesday, Mr. Trump called for the impeachment of Judge James E. Bosberg, the Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, after the judge ordered a pause on the deportation to El Salvador of more than 200 Venezuelan migrants said to be gang members. For good measure, Mr. Trump called the judge a radical left lunatic of a judge, a troublemaker and agitator. All this because Judge Bosberg wanted first to determine whether the administration was correct in invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to deport the Venezuelan immigrants without a hearing. It's called due process, which is guaranteed by the Constitution to ensure that no person is deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Within hours, the tectonic plates of the constitutional order shifted beneath Mr. Trump's feet. The Chief Justice of the United States, John G. Roberts Jr., the head of the third branch of government, rebuked the president in a rare missive. For more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision, the Chief Justice instructed. Unbowed, Mr. Trump laced into Judge Bosberg the next day on his Truth Social platform. If a president doesn't have the right to throw murderers and other criminals out of our country because a radical left lunatic judge wants to assume the role of president, then our country is in very big trouble and destined to fail. No one wants murderers or other criminals to be allowed to stay in this country, but to rid the country of them, the president first must follow the Constitution. Judge Bosberg doesn't want to assume the role of president. The president wants to assume the role of judge. At a hearing on Friday, and a further development in this showdown between the president and the judiciary, Judge Bosberg expressed skepticism about the administration's use of a wartime statute to deport immigrants without a hearing to challenge whether they were gang members. As the government has asserted, the policy ramifications of this are incredibly troublesome and problematic and concerning, he said. He also said he planned to get to the bottom of whether the Trump administration had violated his temporary order against the deportations. Mr. Trump seems supremely confident, though deludedly so, that he can win this war against the federal judiciary just as he was deludedly confident that he could win the war he instigated against America's democracy after the 2020 election. The very thought of having to submit to his nemesis, the federal judiciary, must be anguishing for Mr. Trump, who only last month proclaimed, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." But the judiciary will never surrender its constitutional role to interpret the Constitution, no matter how often Mr. Trump and his allies call for the impeachment of judges who have ruled against him. As Chief Justice John Marshall explained almost 225 years ago in the seminal case of Marbury v. Madison, it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. If Mr. Trump continues to attempt to usurp the authority of the courts, the battle will be joined, and it will be up to the Supreme Court, Congress, and the American people to step forward and say enough. As the Declaration of Independence said, referring to King George III of Britain, a prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Mr. Trump appears to have forgotten that Americans fought the Revolutionary War to secure their independence from the British monarchy and establish a government of laws, not of men, so that Americans would never again be subject to the whims of a tyrannical king. As Thomas Paine wrote in Common Sense in 1776, "In America the law is king. For as in absolute governments the king is law, so in free countries the law ought to be king, and there ought to be no other." If the president oversteps his authority in his dispute with Judge Bosberg, the Supreme Court will step in and assert its undisputed constitutional power to say what the law is. A rebuke from the nation's highest court in his wish for war with the nation's federal courts could well cripple Mr. Trump's presidency and tarnish his legacy. And Chief Justice Marshall's assertion that it is the duty of the courts to say what the law is will be the last word.
So many of Trump's top allies, Stephen Miller, Elon Musk, suggesting these judges who are now under threat, they should be impeached. They should be removed, forgetting the ideas of the co-equal branches of government. Although I should note that Schoolhouse Rock that taught us all that now in jeopardy because the Department of Education is going to be closed. So therefore, that won't be as widespread as previously. But I think there is an element here, though we're seeing. I've been talking to people in the West Wing, and I have a piece today about how they're doing this on the immigration front, about Stephen Miller at the forefront of this, trying to use presidential powers, arcane ones. We saw one already that dates from the 1798 to try to push the limits as to what they can do. And that includes now trying to intimidate federal judges to move the law, if need be, as we heard from President Trump in the interview this week, saying, no, we're not going to defy a court order, but clearly setting a template, Peter Baker, to eventually do so. And some argue perhaps already have. So that's my question to you, is the strategy here from the West Wing to keep testing, to keep pushing, to keep prodding, to looking for the weak links, that, yeah, maybe right now they will largely obey court orders, maybe try to fight them on technical grounds, but it certainly seems like they're laying the groundwork for something bigger.
Yeah, they're explaining to their public their version of what's happening, right? So the president says, I'm going to obey court orders. At the same time, he's now stirring the pot on this impeachment stuff. So what happens yesterday morning? He sends out a fundraising email titled Impeach, 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 specifically going after Judge Bosberg, the judge, in the case we're talking about here, to his supporters, who describing the judge as a radical lunatic, all that kind of stuff. So he's explaining to his public, at the very least, why he's losing. So the story to his public, to his base, to his supporters, isn't that Donald Trump is violating the law, as according to these federal judges. The story is the federal judges are off their duties. They're not the rogue judges. They're somehow not doing it. That's why Chief Justice Roberts, I think, spoke up, because he wanted to make it not about one judge, not about Judge Bosberg, but about the system. And in taking those arrows himself a little bit, he's saying, you're not being fair to, you're not right to go after one judge, basically. This is about the judiciary and how we work. And you can appeal if you don't like the judgment. But you're right. The question is whether they're laying the groundwork for something more radical down the road. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the concern by a lot of people in Washington right now, including Republicans.
And you know, Rev, as the Wall Street Journal editorial page said yesterday, you don't want your decisions challenged. Follow the law. And by the way, Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal editorial page saying, you don't like the results, follow the law.
I think that the fact that it was Murdoch's Wall Street Journal saying that shows how far out this is. And you've got to wonder what they're building toward. But when you look at the fact that Donald Trump said from his first term, his hero was Andrew Jackson, who defied the law. I learned from our historian here that he wasn't the one that said enforce it, but he certainly was the one that would challenge it. Mm-hmm. Trump gave every signal that he intends to upset how we deal with the balances of power and enforcement of laws of judges. And I think that this is what we're seeing, a test run. Only God knows where this is really leading in terms of where they want to go with this.
Well, I mean, they're going to push me to the boundaries as far as they can push the boundaries. They've said it. And they are certainly well within their rights to try to push the boundaries as far as they can. But when a judge and when courts push back and say, nope, can't cross that line, that is the law of the land.